So hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started, if that's okay. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for coming. I know we've all got busy schedules, so we're very appreciative that you're willing to take a bit of time out of your day and come see this event. I'm John Villasenor. I'm the director of the Digital Technologies Initiative within the Luskin Center for Innovation, which is within the Luskin School of Public Affairs here at UCLA. Today's panel is the fifth in a series of 6 that we've been having throughout the course of the academic year on a variety of topics at the technology, intersection really of technology and policy. And today's topic today's panel is on a topic that really couldn't be more relevant to economic prosperity and competitiveness in the next several decades, which is creating a digitally fluent workforce. So I'll give you a bit of let me just give an overview of how the event's going to work, and then we'll get right into it. So we've got really an all-star lineup of panelists. What I'll do is I'll start by briefly giving a 20, 30-second introduction, description of the background of each person. And then each of our panelists will then start off with a sort of 5-minute-ish statement where they give a little bit of background about their own organization and their own work in this area and some of the things that they think are particularly important under the umbrella of this topic. We'll then go to a set of questions that I'll be directing as the moderator, and of course we'll obviously be having discussion among the panelists. And then the end of the event, the last sort of 15, 20 minutes or so, we'll be welcoming questions from the audience, and we typically end these events around 1:25 or 1:30. So that's the plan, and let me then start by introducing our panelists. Immediately to my left, we have Sarah Holland, who's from Google, and specifically from the Public Policy Group at Google. Sarah is the U.S. lead for Google's strategy and programs regarding youth and technology, including online safety, digital literacy, controversial content, and also she co-leads education issues. Prior to joining Google, she was a legislative assistant and senior advisor to Senator Mark Pryor on online safety, communications, and technology, among other things. To her left, we have Lori Harnick, who is the general manager for Citizen and Public Affairs with Microsoft. She is, in this role, Lori leads Microsoft's global network on corporate social responsibility and service to communities, as well as the company's public relations of all legal and public policy issues. In the most recent fiscal year, Microsoft donated nearly $1 billion in cash and software to nonprofit organizations around the world, and has obviously been a thought leader in some of the areas of this topic as well. To her left, we have Jane Margolis, who hails from a few hundred meters away here at UCLA. She's with the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, and her work focuses on structural inequities and belief systems that perpetuate segregation and denied access to learning, especially in STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines. She's the author of several award-winning books, including one called Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing, that was published by MIT Press, as well as a book on education, race, and computing, which discusses the daily lives of students and teachers in 3 Los Angeles public high schools. And then last but certainly not least, speaking of Los Angeles schools, we have Todd Ula, who is an administrator with the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is, of course, an enormous school district. He's been with LAUSD for a number of years. He's been a science teacher, district director of instructional technology, a director of science education, a high school principal, and is currently with the central office of LAUSD focusing on STEM initiatives and computer science. And he is also a UCLA holder of a doctoral degree from UCLA. So that's obviously an incredibly qualified and diverse group of panelists representing a really whole big spectrum of the kind of different viewpoints that people can have on this issue. So I guess we'll just start and ask if you want to go first.
Sure. Or. And I'll keep my remarks brief because selfishly I want to leave a lot of time for audience questions and hear more from my panelists. But like John said, I lead our issues around youth and technology, but we don't look at the idea of a digitally fluent workforce as just youth. We do everything from programs to support programs and initiatives that target youth, but also the senior community as well, and everything in between. I think this idea of a digitally fluent workforce is a really interesting idea, and I think it's great that we're having a panel on this today, because I don't know if everyone knows if there's like a unified definition of what we mean by that. And at Google, we approach it, a lot of people probably think we approach it strictly from the CS STEM perspective, but it's bigger than that to us. And we do a lot of work around digital literacy, which I think is an incredibly important part of a digitally fluent workforce, but also the computer science and STEM. And one of the things that's of critical importance to us is looking at communities that are historically underrepresented, not only in receiving digital literacy education and understanding what that means, but also in CS and STEM. And so we do a lot of work, we run a lot of different programs, everything from camps and scholarships to supporting other organizations that are doing some incredible work, and looking forward to do more about that.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So, Laurie?
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here, and it's really a pleasure to be with all of you. So within Microsoft's corporate citizenship work, we have a special focus on empowering youth through technology to find greater opportunity in education, employment, and entrepreneurship. And when we look at the topic of digital fluency, we look at sort of the full spectrum of how technology can enable greater opportunity. And as Sarah said, it definitely includes the basics of digital literacy, how to use IT to become more productive, et cetera. And then but it carries on forward to those people who have careers in IT administration, how we use technology and management of that, all the way to then how do we create technology. And for us, we're seeing around the world, not just here in California or in the United States, but around the world, a growing opportunity to increase access to computer science, programming, and computational skills at an earlier age for young people who are from a variety of economic and demographic backgrounds. I think the fact that everyone is using technology, from their early days, now makes it just a quick leap to helping sort of excite them about not only how can you use technology, but how can I create technology, and the opportunities that opens up for young people, whether they pursue a career in IT or in other fields that utilize IT, or frankly just learn the computational and analytical skills that can be useful to them no matter what they do going forward. So it's an interesting topic. I'm so glad we're here to talk about that.
Thanks very much, Laurie. Jane?
Okay, my work, I'm in education, and my work is looking at how different disciplines, different careers get segregated, and how underrepresentation gets fostered in these different careers. So I have looked for the last 15 years at computer science and looking at why there's so few women and so many African American Latino students, especially in that field. And especially it's important, why I think computer science is important, is because it is a new 21st century knowledge that not just because we need more computer scientists in this world, but because if you want to go into film, if you want to go into oceanography, architecture, auto mechanics, anything, you have a jump start. Doors open if you know some computer science. And what I mean by computer science is not just keyboarding and knowing the internet, which is actually, when we did our research, we found that many at the high school level were defining computer science as these basic rudimentary skills, especially in schools with high numbers of African American and Latino students. It was just the basic rudimentary skills. What we mean by computer science is the problem solving, the logical thinking, the algorithmic thinking, how you learn how to create and design with technology, not just use technology. So my research it looks at all the different factors that happen, especially at the high school level, going up to college, to keep this a very segregated field. So we dispel the fact that technology is a great equalizer. Number one, it's a myth. And we show, and that's a tension, because we have been sort of brought up with this sense that technology was going to make access for information for all, and it was going to be somewhat of an equalizer. So we look at all the structural inequalities, how there's great disparities in learning opportunities, and how there's belief systems in the schools that equates what we call preparatory privilege. The kids that came from families that had robotics kits under the Christmas tree, who had a lot of resources for software, who have parents that could afford to send them to computer camp, that those are the kids that are assumed to have this innate talent in computer science, the ones who are considered to be the good fit, the smartest kids. And actually what we've been showing in our research, that there's a lot of this preparatory privilege that then turns into belief systems that then impacts what curriculum and what courses are offered to which kids. And then there's public policy that keeps computer, which is a whole other subject, that keeps computer science out of the schools because it's not one of the subjects that's being tested. So there's this whole intersection that is working to keep the field of computer science and the world of technology to be very unequal and very segregated. And what we are trying to do is come up with solutions to address that.
Thank you very much. And then Todd?
Yeah, one of the solutions that Jane did not mention is her Exploring Computer Science course, which is offered in our district at 35 schools. And I'll talk a little bit about Mobilize in a minute. But our district, can you hear me?
Push this on here.
Push your
Is the green light on? There you go.
Hello? There we go. All right, better. So our district, John asked me to say a little bit about our district. Currently, it's about 80,000 employees, 545,000 kids in a unified school district. I think it is the largest in the country. There's over 200,000 kids that are engaged in charter schools with independent as well as charter management organizations around our city. And digital fluency is huge in terms of a lot of the things that we do as a district to bring education to bear and to make content accessible to all of our learners. Our superintendent also always says, and I think this is right on point, is that LA, what happens in LA really kind of has an impact nationally because of our diversity. And so we in Los Angeles, we're focusing on right now the Common Core state standards. That's a consortium across the country. I'm sure you're all aware of that. Implementing the Common Core, along with that, we're mobilizing a one-to-one initiative called the Common Core Technology Project to address how we define and redefine education in our classrooms in terms of digital access and fluency. So the Common Core, we're focused on the Common Core, as Jane was saying, looking at and bringing into all the content areas the notion of having students argue and being able to have argumentation, basing their arguments on evidence, looking at a claim and defending it based on that evidence across math, science, social studies, and English. Those are all key things that are bubbling up as foci of our instructional program. And then mirroring that and focusing that as well is that we have a great diversity in our classrooms, English learners, standard English learners. I think there's 96 different languages that we represent in Los Angeles. So access to content is something that's very, very important. So that being said, I think the notion of digital fluency and literacy and access is so important in Los Angeles as we move forward with our new standards and our new initiatives.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. So fascinating set of perspectives already. And let me just start by asking, it's easy for us to use terms like, or phrases like digital fluency, but what do we really mean? We all can agree that we want to create a 21st century digitally fluent workforce, but what does it mean to be digital fluency, and what should our goals be? And in any order, anyone can say, speak up if they have any thoughts on what it means to be, what are we aiming for with digital fluency?
Well, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier that I look at as meaning two different things. There's one that applies to everyone, a universal, and then there's one that applies to a more specific kind of audience and group. And that first one is the ability, kind of like what you mentioned, is to leverage the technology that's available and really take whatever you're doing, whatever your career field is, and use whatever technology is available at the time and create new technologies that you can really take advantage of to take your work even further. It also means simple stuff as digital literacy and citizenship. So it's using the internet, but using it safely and responsibly. You hear a lot of, these days about data security. Well, sometimes security, most of the time, security is only as good as the end user. So it's really important that people can have those basic skills that help them understand how to protect themselves on the internet, right? To even watch out for phishing and malware, simple things like that. A lot of times you hear about people who maybe get in trouble at work because of their offline behavior. So I think digital fluency also needs to address something like that, that you know how to use this in ethically responsible ways. I think the other point is computer science and STEM. And at Google, we think that everyone should have access to this, to the ability to tap into computer science and STEM technology. And we work a lot internally, externally, and with other groups to make that possible. Because you can, like you mentioned, apply this to your job no matter what it is. And again, going back to really making sure that we expand the pipeline, because I think you talked about there's real limitations to not only attracting people to the field, but keeping them there, giving them the necessary support to make sure that they actually, if they are going to pursue a degree in college, that they graduate, that they're retained, and pursue careers in that field. And it takes some work that we all have to do together to make sure those barriers are broken down.
And I think that the scope here really is looking at both STEM, CS work that's both BA and non-BA related, because there's every job, I think, out there across this nation, across the world, digital fluency has an impact. So I think in America, and certainly in LA, we're right now, by 2018, 1/5, 20% of the jobs here in LA County are going to be STEM related. And then in California, by 2018, they were projecting 500,000 jobs and only having 40,000 folks available, educated to handle that. So this is a national security interest. It's a national interest at best.
I would also add, when I think about digital fluency, I think all the things that you have mentioned. But this is something that is changing, year by year. So what I would have said maybe last year is different from this year. So I think that right now the whole world of big data and data science is really a critical part of computer science. And all because of computers and technology, it's generating all this data. So there's all these ethnical. There's all these, I've got ethnicity on my line and ethical. So there's all these ethical issues about the use of data and privacy issues, but there's also the issue of learning how to, for students and all students, to know what is data, how do you analyze it, how do you represent it, how do you be critical readers of data and interpretations of data, because it's driving so much now. So part of our course and another grant that we did called Mobilize, it's taking cell phones and having kids collect data of things that are really important to them and their lives and their community, and then learning how to share that data, how to analyze the data, how to represent the data, how to critique the data. And so everything is about bringing this higher level thinking into the public schools for us and making it accessible and engaging for all students. And so I would say digital fluency is a moving target, and it's becoming almost, it's linked to everything nowadays.
Okay, and then what are the, keying off that, what are some of the ways in which the private sector and the education system, whether higher education or at any level, are collaborating to kind of foster increased digital fluency and should be collaborating?
So one thing I can comment on there is we talked a little bit about access to computer science education and opportunity, and how to broaden that to as many young people as possible, no matter their background, no matter their school system. And we have a program that we started called TEALS, and it's basically our engineers who are working full-time at Microsoft volunteering their time to teach computer science in high schools for one or two classes a week alongside the in-classroom teacher. We started this in just a couple schools in the Seattle area, and we're now together with companies like Google and others in the tech industry. We have together almost 300 volunteers who are teaching across the United States. What they're finding is, and when we started early on in a couple schools in Seattle, our engineers wanted to do this. They saw that there were kids who are not seeing the light bulb in terms of the opportunity of computer science because they just didn't have the access to what this could be and what it could do for them. And the initial response from the schools was, oh, that sounds interesting. We might have a few kids interested in that. They didn't know. Well, once we got in, the excitement just really elevated because they got to learn something and see that not the technology they were using was something they could actually create. And that's why the program has grown. I think that, and it's been wonderful working with the LAUSD and other school districts. We're in 10 schools in California this school year. We'll be in over 40 in the next school year here in California alone. I think what we're finding with all of this is working together with school districts, with government officials, with our colleagues in other companies, with academics, is when you place it out there, the kids themselves will tell you whether this is something they find interesting, they like, they're enjoying, and from there you can build something that's really impactful and effective. But along with that needs to go public policy that's going to support it, because another initiative that we're all working on is called Making Computer Science Count. What the reality today is that there are only, I believe it's 19 states plus the District of Columbia where computer science classes in high school count toward a math or science graduation credit, which means even if your child is taking AP Computer Science in one of these states where it doesn't count, they're not going to get a math or science credit toward graduating. And looking at what everyone has to accomplish in high school to graduate, and the rigor of those standards and requirements, it's a barrier now. So there's policy that has to happen to encourage and recognize the pursuit of this. And then there's work that we can do in sort of public-private partnership to bring the teaching and the topic into schools for kids at an earlier age.
And maybe if I can just ask a quick follow-up question, it seems sensible to me that it should count. So then the question is, what is what's the resistance from, and what argument is cited as why it shouldn't?
I think one of the things that's important that higher ed and business, the chambers of commerce, the public engage in is here in California at least, is the notion of teacher competency and teacher education. So one of the great ways that we can start to build infrastructure and leadership capacity and content knowledge is to look at ways that we can improve, or not improve, but incorporate some type of competency to teach computer sciences in the schools and integrate it into content. Like the grant that we were talking about, Mobilize, we're using cell phones in math and science, algebra and biology, and kids are using cell phones to capture data and apply it to the content in that class. There's a lot of professional development that needs to go on with that, and there's a lot of challenges. And so the more we look outward here in this 21st century to think about the teaching force and how we work together, higher ed, the school district, and business, the better off our kids are going to be.
And just a quick comment on that. What's interesting, I think it's the teachers who helping them teach computer science and so forth as a course, but it's also a mindset across teachers. I have a personal anecdote, which is I just love every time I think about it. In December, there was an initiative called Computer Science Week in code.org, which Google supports and Microsoft supports, et cetera. Tried to encourage kids to go online and learn an hour of coding. And so there was a push through a lot of the public schools across the country to bring this sort of hour of code to life. And my daughter is 8th grader in middle school, in a public middle school in the Seattle area, and who, by the way, pretty much rolls her eyes whenever I mention computer science. She rolls her eyes at a lot of things I talk about. But she came home one day, she came home from that, a day during that week, and she said, oh, we had hour of code today. And I was like, oh, you did? Was that like in your math class? She's like, no, it was my Spanish teacher. My Spanish teacher told, said, learning coding is like learning another language. So let's do it. So, and I thought that was so interesting because it was not just the math or science teacher who thought of it. It was someone in the humanities who thought of it. So I just think that's a great story and one I'd love to hear more about in other places.
And just one thing to build on that, not only does a lot of states not count computer science and STEM as part of their graduation requirement, but according to code.org, 9 out of 10 K-12 schools in the United States don't offer programming classes. So that's a whole other issue, is not only does it count and you can fit it into the school day, but you may not even have access to that at your school. And it may be because of budget constraints, or maybe it's qualified teachers. And I think that's something that that's really important, is expanding that availability. And so we have this neat program called Computer Science for High School, where we give grants, and it's to universities, I believe, that teach high school teachers how to teach computer science. And so I think you're right. It's not only partnerships like that, but even taking it back a step. If you have computer science classes at your school, you may not have sufficient broadband to where you can even make that a workable solution. So when we talk about public policy, we also need to even take it up a level and think about not only access to qualified teachers and classes and content and curriculum and things like that, but sufficient speed in your school, your library, at home. Sufficient education to really tap into that, and again, do it safely and responsibly. So I think it's a whole mix, and like you correctly pointed out, there's a lot of stuff that we can do as industry together, separately in our different ways to work with schools, but also working with policymakers and really addressing this issue that can only be solved by all of us together, which is the broadband, which is really, I think, hurting a lot of people and really a significant barrier.
I just wanted to say one thing on that, which was I think that the reason why it's not in the schools, why computer science is not counting, is that there's a time lag. Computers first came in and they were being used for the new updated typewriters. And so everyone was learning word processing. And so it was considered to be a vocational subject. And what was happening is right there is where a class divide was happening. So the kids and the kids who had the computers at home, again, what I was talking about, the preparatory privilege, and the parents that were encouraging them to get inside the computers and tinker and go to computer camp, they were getting the background to become the computer scientists. Whereas in the schools, with the vast majority of the kids, it was being used for glorified typewriters. And so when we did our research, we went in and we saw that many of the schools were aglow with technology and computers, but we call them technology rich but curriculum poor. They were not teaching the high-level computer science that was necessary in the schools. Likewise, I mean, people get so trapped when they think about access and equality of opportunity. So I know this is controversial, and I'm sitting next to a district leader here. But when when billions of dollars were spent for iPads, for LAUSD, to think that that's going to be a solution, again, I think it's the question of the curriculum and what is going to be taught. If they're being used as glorified remedial readers, if they're being assumed that they're going to turn kids on to learning, well, it depends what kind of learning and what are the teachers teaching them to do. So it's very complex, and it's almost like technology has become a Rorschach for a lot of things. And for me, it's equity. I mean, you look at it and you just look at how it's just perpetuating inequity in our society. And what can we do about it? And it's policy, it's teachers getting certified to be computer science, it's making it a course that gets into the schools, it's challenging who can do it, it's challenging the role models. I don't know, I'm going to stop after this, but if you just see the last, have you seen Silicon Valley, the new show that's being perpetuated everywhere, and there's posters everywhere? Well, you look at it, it's 5 white guys sitting there holding their chins like Steve Jobs. And it's basically a show which is looking at the culture, which is something that really has to change also if you're going to get more women and underrepresented minorities into this field. So culture around technology also has to change, and that's a biggie.
You were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, the whole notion of one-to-one and bring your own devices to school, that's sweeping the nation. And it's roiled in many, many states and districts across the country with professional development, the device, the internet connectivity. You know, but I want to make sure we focus that the kids are ready for this. The kids, no matter what color they are ready for this. And it's going to help us in the long run in terms of our national efforts in making our society better. And my personal focus in the work that I do is to help, and I agree with Jane in some senses, that we need to really create what I call emancipatory educational experiences using tools that we have in the classroom for children, so that they're freed and can really begin to think in the ways that I was saying, in terms of using data, argumentation, defense, critical thinking, using computational thinking in the classroom. And I think we all have roles in making that happen for our kids in the classroom.
And you know, I think also, I totally agree, there's also beyond the classroom, and the work that our team does is global. And so what's interesting for us is we started focusing on this whole area, this topic here in the US, but as we look at our nonprofits that we work with around the world that are serving youth, we're finding that they and the young people they're serving, they're ready for it as well. You know, I was at a community center for after-school programs in Korea, and there was a 9-year-old boy there saying, you know, he'd done a coding class, and he, you know, hey, I wanted to be a rock star. Now I want to be a computer programmer. You know, I was like, get this guy on tape. You know, you know, but it's just it's putting it in perspective of what's happening in California and the U.S. It's happening around the world, and it's working in school systems, and it's also working with nonprofits. They have a huge role to play as they fill in some of the gaps in society, and we're working with a number of them across the U.S. and globally to help them tune their after-school programs or their camp programs so that they can bring this into the student experience around the school as well as in the school.
By the way, code.org, for LA, just throw this out, I'm very proud of it. 200,000 kids in LAUSD wrote 5 million lines of code in a week. So I just
and wasn't it also true that of the number of students who participated in code.org and LAUSD, 46% were girls?
46% were girls.
Yeah, so that's pretty remarkable. I mean, because that's above the, when you looked at how many kids participated across the US, it was 18% were girls. Right. So here there was a special effort made, and it really landed well with young women.
Our iPad movement, what we were able to do was we pushed out an app to every kid's iPad and around code.org and the Hour of Code, and it caught fire. I mean, it was like amazing to see. Before we did that, it was a little slow going, but once we pushed the app out to all the iPads, it just took fire. It was amazing to see that happen. So that was a great application of the one-to-one technology that we had out there.
I think we're all looking to see that become even bigger and better next year. This was the first year of Made with Code, so I think it's going to be exciting to hopefully see even better stats next year. But I think you brought up a good point. Not only is it in the U.S. but around the world, we just started a partnership with the World Affairs Council, because I think it's not just CS and STEM teachers, it's getting all teachers the support they need, supporting them through free professional development to bring all kinds of technology into their classroom in a safe and responsible way. But this partnership with World Affairs Council was teaching them how to make their classroom globally connected, right? So back in the day, when I was in school, we had got to say when I was in school years ago, you had pen pals maybe. That was the way that you got to engage with somebody else. And now you can do that through so many different mechanisms through virtual field trips, through you can access museums virtually and tap into their archives. So there's all kinds of neat things to do, but I think you've got to help give people the support they need to really take off with that. And I think, so teacher training and supporting them through free, accessible ways, really actionable ways, and giving them the capacity to do that, I think is going to be exciting and hopefully be a contributing factor to improving these stats that we've all been talking about.
That's great. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. We're talking about education, which is really incredibly important, but of course we also already have an enormous existing workforce, right, of people who are already, have completed their education. And so I guess the question is, what is the level of digital fluency in our workforce today, and what are the gaps? And of course, recognizing that Google and Microsoft are companies where probably they're some of the most digitally fluent people on the planet working, but not all companies have that level of digital fluency. So what are the gaps in today's workforce? Because these are people who have many decades of hopefully productive careers ahead of them, and how can we make them more productive? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, well, the one, I don't know if you've already mentioned this, Todd, but the one stat that I think is interesting, today there are about 120,000 jobs being created every year in the US that require a bachelor's in computer science or engineering or programming. So not just IT skills, but computer programming bachelors, and only 50,000 graduates. So there's a gap of 70,000. It's an opportunity gap, really. 70,000 jobs that are there every year, and U.S. Universities are not graduating what's needed for those jobs. So that addresses your question partly, because it's still about those who are just coming out of university. But that does kind of shine a light on the fact that you've got this 120,000 jobs being created every year requiring a bachelor's in computer science. And much less than half are being filled by U.S. graduates. And when you take that and you expand it to look at jobs in the IT field generally, the number just explodes.
Yeah, it's huge. This notion of digital fluency across all industry sectors is real, and it's worldwide. And it's something that, as a nation, we have to really grapple with. Speaking in terms of LA County, just talk briefly about that. As I said, 20% of the jobs now are in STEM. And right now, as we look at our district, and I know there's some district folks here, most of the kids that drop out, we have a 56%, 60% dropout rate in LAUSD and other major areas. So there's this pipeline of kids that are going to where? Community colleges. They're going into work. They're going right into workforces. And I think as an education system, community college and K-12, we need to work really strongly with Microsoft and with Google and other agencies to reach the non-BA'd technical fields that kids can do and work and be productive and have dignity about in their world. And that's something that as a district, what I'm trying to do is make that happen in terms of that connection, and because it's huge. There's a lot of kids that have skills. You go listen to any kid on the corner that's doing a rap and talking about the world and with his brothers and doing the things that they're doing. That's pure intelligence that's coming out of their mouths. And putting that to work in lining with the jobs out there is something that is really important to do. So BA'd, non-BA'd jobs here in LA and across the country, we have to bridge that gap.
So let me ask, we've talked a lot about computer science and STEM fields, and so obviously it's a critical growth area. We've got all these shortages, but at the same time, I think and I think probably most of us here would acknowledge the incredible value of a liberal arts education and of these topics. I don't think we would define success as every single person in the country becomes a computer science major, right? I think
why not?
I think there are a lot of other fields that aren't computer science that bring incredible value to our culture. And so the question is how can we on the one hand promote the kinds of education that we absolutely need for workforce fluency, yet also preserve the value and respect accorded to many of these other disciplines, which in their own ways have contributed so much to our society.
I think I don't want to give a platitude, but it's all about balance. And it makes me think about this op-ed that recently ran in the New York Times that talked about Google's hiring practices, and it was based on an interview that was done with Laszlo Bock, who's our head of people operations, which I guess translated means human resources. And he was talking about our approach to hiring, and it's not just about CS and STEM. That's obviously critically important, especially for the majority of jobs at Google that are engineering. But a lot of what makes someone successful is other attributes that I think the humanities and other disciplines do really good about facilitating. The ability to process information on the fly, think quickly, take disparate and maybe large complex amounts of information and boil them down. I think it takes the ability to be humble, intellectually humble, but also the willingness to accept new ideas and be challenged. The idea to evolve your thinking and really be innately curious and always take in new information. So I don't think we should do CS and STEM to the degree that we neglect these other really beneficial ideas, because what technology, I think when a lot of people think of it, they think of it as disruptive. When it first comes, when a new technology first comes to the forefront, it's disruptive in a way. And I think to really think about that and think outside the box, you need these other qualities that come along with that education, so you get a balanced approach. Because you don't want someone just thinking about, this is the way we've always done things. You really need people to think beyond that. So it's, again, don't want to give a platitude, but I think it's really about balance and bringing in, even if you do have a CS and STEM degree, that you have a nice balance with the other attributes.
And I think, Jane, you mentioned earlier that it's the critical thinking, it's the problem solving. There's a lot within CS courses, whether those are basic or advanced, that brings those really important skills as well. But I do also agree with you, Sarah, that building in more that what are called 21st century skills, this idea of analytical thinking throughout what you're doing. So when we're looking at supporting, whether it's schools or nonprofits in the education of young people, it's from a technical perspective, but it's also from that more qualitative perspective of the types of skills that are needed in the workforce. And those are not just technical, they are I don't like this term, but I'll use it anyway, the quote unquote softer skills, but the skills that enable the thinking and the problem solving and the breaking through barriers and the teamwork and the collaboration. So that absolutely bringing those together is the best possible approach in my view.
Yeah, I think that's very important that in our work, when we go and talk with principals and we say we have this course exploring computer science and it introduces students to the breadth and the exciting engagement, and it's very interdisciplinary, often they'll say, well, what do you want us to do? Give up art? Give up music? And
Or
it's
math.
like, no. And this just shows the dilemma of sort of public policy, sort of when you go into an institution, public education, that is being starved, because people voted against taxes and for the schools, that it's this land of scarcity. And you get in this position where if you're arguing the importance of computer science for all kids, you're confronted with, well, what should we give up? And that's a horrible situation that our education system is in. And I really do believe that while the image of being a computer science before was just, these guys squirreled behind a computer and not caring about anything else but for hacking's sake, that really is not what computer science is about now. It really is more computing for a purpose. There's outside of the people that all they want to do is design games, but there's many people that want to really make a better world and use technology for that. And these interdisciplinary perspectives that come from the humanities and everything are really critically important. And it's also very important in terms of opening up the culture of technology, and that there be an appreciation. I mean, part of the interview process should not just be how fast can you program something, but what is your larger global perspective, your problem-solving perspective? What are all the other richness that you bring to this?
Yeah, from a district perspective, I totally agree with Jane. From a district perspective, as I said at the beginning, our work right now is focused around the whole curriculum. The Common Core Standards movement across the country and here in LA is about educating our kids well and using their shifts, we call them shifts in our instructional practice. And so it's about instruction. It's not necessarily about technology, but it's about instruction. It's about good instruction, good first instruction for kids. And so the integration of technology in that process is what we are after across the board. And I think the liberal arts piece plays into that because we're talking English, math, science, social studies, and our electives.
Music.
Music, of course, and art. But we're talking about having kids use instructional models that really engage them and tools that really engage them in the learning that's going on in those specific disciplines that will apply to a liberal arts education overall for a kid graduating from one of our high schools. We want them to be able to say, if I want to be a musician or an artist or a banker or whatever, they have the skills and problem-solving knowledge and the foundation to carry that inquiry forward in a ways that's important for them.
And what are some ways, to this point about fostering digital fluency, what are some additional ways that governments can contribute? Whether that's at the federal level, the state level, the county level, local level. What, obviously government, from all levels, in all levels of government, we've got people passionately interested in this, and there's lots of good stuff going on, but what else can we do? What are some gaps that we could fill that any of you have seen in your own work in this?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. We've talked about the access and the credit for computing in schools. There's also, we talked about the professional development and certification. Mm-hmm. And then there's also this idea of, and I think you brought this up, Sarah, what exactly is this computer science education that we're talking about, and coming up with common language and vocabulary and standards for what it is that we as a country believe should be provided as and accessible by students across the country. So I think there's a number of places. It's the standards, it's the teaching, and it's the recognition for it. I think that's a role that government alone can play with input from educators, with input from companies and nonprofits, but that does come into public policy.
And from an education's perspective, I think we're really grappling right now with kids that are failing classes and not, right now in LA specifically, we have an A through G requirement, and we have failure rates that are pretty high. And so what happens when kids want to make up those credits so that they can graduate in 4 years, right? Well, they have to have credit recovery. And so there's a lot of bills right now on the assembly floor here in California having to do with concurrent enrollment, AB 1540, for instance. And so we're beginning to grapple with how do we offer kids more opportunities to succeed. We used to have summer school. I know a lot of you probably went to summer school and took an advanced class or review class. That is not happening too much anymore. So those types of opportunities that allow greater access to all children and in our communities for credit recovery and credit advancement are huge. That's a big thing. I think we will see more of that on the horizon from government across the country. And then the second piece is the whole notion of career development and looking at how the government and the states and local businesses can support different types of certifications to fill those non-VA type roles. And that's going to take policy adjustment. That's going to take a focus of the will of the people to make sure that there's a connection to that pipeline for people that aren't at a UCLA or not at a community college, but are out there that have skills and knowledge and want to contribute, but need a way to do so. I think that workforce development piece that goes through cities, that goes through states, that goes to our government is absolutely a major, major thing.
And some people, it might, give me a second, maybe explain what concurrent enrollment is. Some people might.
Yeah, for instance, a student that's enrolled in Marshall High School wants to go to, needs an algebra class or wants to take an AP class. But yet they have 6 classes on their schedule, right? So there's no room for them to take it at that school during the day. So they can enroll in what? A community college course that is concurrently enrolled with the K through 12 Marshall High Schools, let's say, that student's course load. So right now we can't take and get 2 funding. We get an ADA for that kid during the day. So, and so does community college. Well, how does the state resolve that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's very helpful.
Yeah.
And Sarah, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I think I would go back to every level of government. It's hard to have a digitally fluent workforce if you don't have access to broadband. That's an essential, right? You have to have high-speed connectivity, and there's so many parts of government that can come together and really connect the rest of the country. And it's not just a rural issue, it's an urban issue, it's a socioeconomic issue, it's kind of across the board. I'd also say that all levels of government could make sure that they're not standing in the way, to make sure that the regulations that they have on the books now and the laws they're contemplating in the future don't inhibit this access, don't inhibit things like personalized learning. You brought up the dropout rate. That's a serious issue. And we've seen research shows that students do best and they retain knowledge when they're engaged in it and they're finding pathways to connect with that knowledge. So if you're really interested in music and you're just not connecting in the classroom, well, maybe there's a way that personalized learning or data or technology can help you connect with what you're learning in the classroom and apply it to your passions. Right. I think there's access to affordable devices, going again back to the essentials. So I would just say it's looking at the very basic things like that, but also pulling back to say, are our rules carefully calibrated to make sure that we're not standing in the way? Are we facilitating this access in an appropriate way, but are we making sure that we're balancing that by not prohibiting the kind of exciting things that we're just at the cusp of?
Yeah, as a high school principal, I know Facebook was my scourge because of the level of cyber bullying and so there's a safety issue to all this too, is what I'm getting at in terms of federal and state policy. Especially if we're going in to bring your own devices, which many school districts, not particularly ours, is starting to happen kind of de facto anyway, because so many kids have cell phones and access to digital devices. But we need to make sure that there's proper monitoring and a safety net for kids as they use these types of devices.
So I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you think you have a question, you can start thinking about it, and we'll have you come up here and ask it. So my final question here before we go to the audience is, what are some best practices and model programs to help democratize access and opportunities? And I know Jane alluded to this before, but I think this is something for all the panelists. We'd love to hear from anyone's opinion. It's a critical issue, and no less critical now than it was 10, 15 years ago. So how can we address that democratization question?
Well, okay, actually our program, which is a partnership between UCLA and LA, started with LAUSD. Our mission is to democratize computer science knowledge for K through 12. And so we have this curriculum, but not only a curriculum, it's connected with a teacher professional development program. And so it introduces kids to the problem solving, the critical thinking, also web design, robotics, working with big data. And so it's not taking up the notch in terms of thinking and critical thinking, what is normally associated with computer science, plus being very active about recruiting girls. So we have in LA, in 32 schools, we have 46% girls, which is unheard of. The AP nationwide, it's 19% girls. And most 99% of the kids in our program are Latino and African American. Again, unheard of in terms of higher ed, in terms of computer science, and also in terms of the industry. And the Chicago Public Schools, Washington, D.C., New York are picking up our program. And we're really connecting. Our mission is to break the segregation in this field. And we're doing it through taking the best practices in education, about providing role models, about really having discussions with students about the stereotypes that they carry in their own heads about who can do computer science and who can not do it. Really making the classroom places in which a whole variety of kids can see the connection between computer science and issues that they really care about. And doing it through challenging sort of the unequal structures of the schools, the belief systems, and then partnershiping with industry, nonprofits, and everyone around changing policy about it. So that's our mission, is to make this a field that everyone can feel that they can enter and they get support in it, and doing all we can to do that.
Anything else?
Yeah, well, I would just say that, building off what you said, Jane, I mean, the initiative that we have, Youth Spark, is really about what we as a company can do to bring programs and products and services to as many young people as possible, to sort of address the access issue through democratizing the technology. So whether that's our office products that we're providing to schools and teachers, whether it's teacher training, we have an entire global program around that, similar to what Sarah mentioned, about how to use technology to enhance the classroom learning experience. We have, when you look at engineering and developer students, we've got free tools available there. And then it's the training we do through our nonprofits, through the after-school programs and the community program. So I think part of the democratization is is based on what companies are willing and able to do from an investment standpoint, how we're going to invest in the communities and invest in our young people through making our programs and products and services more accessible and affordable and integrated into the broader fabric of the young person's experience in their community or their school.
Yeah, for education, I think, aside from all the great things Jane said, and I totally agree with that, but on a practical level, it's releasing responsibility to the student, having the teacher not as the focus of the lesson, but releasing responsibility to that student so that collaboration, conversation, critical thinking, problem solving occur in ways that utilize the technology and realia from their environments, from their worlds, bring them into their classroom, and then assessing and having students manage kind of their own learning, and then a lot of reflection in classrooms. Those are all best practices that we strive for in LAUSD every day, and we're at all different places, but those are the types of practices that I see that allow the types of emancipatory experiences that I was talking about before to happen in the classroom.
I think it's supporting innovative organizations that are doing really interesting things in this space. I think it's open lines of communication between industry, education, practitioners. I think it is following the latest research and making sure that what we're doing tracks with that we're really looking to the data. And I think it's digital literacy, digital literacy, digital literacy in the schools.
Great. Okay, I think maybe I'm sorry, Jane.
I just want to add one other thing. I wish there's a tension here between the attempt to democratize and kind of a false belief that technology in the world of computing is a meritocracy, because there's just so many inequalities that lead along the way to get those who are working in the technology industry. And so there's this huge tension between the culture of wanting to get people from MIT and Harvard and Stanford and Berkeley, and that's the images associated, and our attempts to really democratize and figure out how to do this, because it's so tied in with the inequality in our world. And so I just look forward to when we can really have those conversations. And
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have, I think some folks have some questions here. Is that right? So if you have some questions, please just briefly state your name and organization, and we'd love to hear your question.
Hi, my name is Jackie. I come from a family that's the opposite of sort of what you're saying. I'm the director and CIO at the business school for technology, and my husband is an LAUSD 7th grade English teacher. And he is a Luddite extraordinaire. So I watched him this summer when he went in to get the iPads. And he was given a day of training, most of which, from what I understand, was distributing them. He's an award-winning English teacher for what he does in the classroom. He's very proud of what he does, and I watched this man become completely disempowered, lose his confidence, because suddenly he was supposed to be doing something with this thing in the classroom. So I applaud, I guess, your efforts with the iPad, although I give them out to people who I want to take the technology out of their hands, so I give them an iPad. It's not something that, in my opinion, teaches technology in the least, but what are you going to do? You've talked a little bit, you talked about teacher training, you talked about curriculum poor, technology rich. The only way to really get where we're talking about is to help these teachers, and handing them a tool that, by the way, kids have been beaten up to steal their iPads, so now they can't even take them out of homeroom. So what are you going to do to help the teachers feel empowered with these devices? Any of you? Businesses, UCLA education, or LA, above all, no offense, LAUSD.
Well, any kind of implementation, those are all good concerns, good questions, and things that we're grappling with here in our district. But any implementation of something new, the initiation requires a lot of maturation, and you're going to have a lot of bumps in that implementation. And there's no right time to do it. The funding is there, and we'll have to work as a team, as a community, to make sure that all of the bumps you talked about are going to be resolved, because the notion of access to technology is not going away. And teachers, administrators, students, parents, and the community are going to have to come around to create a better environment, a better workforce, a better community in the end by engaging in this process. And we in LAUSD, we're going to continue to push communication. We're going to continue to push good applications that help teachers teach. We're going to continue to push on the notion of connectivity in the schools, and we're going to continue to embrace and grow from community input around the whole iPad movement. We do have a high school movement that is geared on laptops, because some of us feel that, and the board felt that high school students are better off with using laptops as machines rather than iPads. So that's happening in 7 schools right now, and we're going to grow that. So this is all a work in progress. And if you look at, tied to research, you look at this evolution of this movement called CCTP, and it will evolve. As it matures, it's our notion, and our superintendent and our board believe that as it matures, it will serve the purpose of digital fluency across the Los Angeles city area, as well as the notions of better teaching and learning. So those are the things we're headed towards. And there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road, and we know that, and we'll take the bruises. But in the end, when I go to a classroom, and I visit them every week, and I see the kids, especially elementary school kids, working with these machines, it's delightful. It's amazing to see what happens. And teachers, we're working with them on the professional development. Steve knows, he's here from LAUSD and one of our tech guys, instructional tech guys. We're really working hard to bring up the professional development for teachers around the city.
Any other comments from the panel on this?
Just that we have at Microsoft, we do have a program called Partners in Learning. It's been running for a number of years, where we do help teachers understand how to use technology to enhance learning. It's the whole point of how can technology help you in your classroom enhance learning. And we have a worldwide event every year. I had the pleasure of attending a few weeks ago in Spain. It brought together these amazing teachers and principals and administrators from around the world who are doing amazing things with just that, using technology to enhance learning. And they have a community among themselves where they're sharing best practices and so forth. So it is an investment we absolutely believe in, which is it's not just about the thing, but how do you work with it to really meet the goals that you have as a teacher for that classroom.
How can you find out about that?
You can come to Microsoft.com citizenship, and there's information there, and if you have any questions, I can help you. Yeah.
I think it's access to free and practical teacher training, right? To where he's not scared of this device or thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to actually work this and not panic when it goes off in class. I think it's really important that he feels empowered to use that, and he empowers his students to use their devices, right? And really open up their world beyond the classroom. There's this idea that we really like where you can learn anytime, anywhere. And he's probably not teaching Joyce, but imagine if he could use maps to explain Joyce, right? To really kind of integrate what he's doing with technology. And I think people are still trying to figure out how to do programs like that we both run. We have the Google Certified Teacher Academy. Like I said, we just partnered with the World Affairs Council, but it's figuring out how to do that at scale to reach all the teachers that are now in schools with one-on-one or BYOD. So we're always looking for neat organizations that are really doing some exciting stuff, but it's got to be where he goes in and he feels good about that device when he leaves the door. And I think we're all figuring that out. We're all looking at the research and trying to find out who all is doing some interesting stuff in this space. So good luck to him, and like to hear how he's doing in a year or two. Hopefully a lot better. And tell him to enroll in some of the programs that we run, and I know there's going to be some other organizations in this space that do some neat stuff, and maybe that's something we can work with school districts on because you're required to get professional development, maybe how this can be a part of that.
And I just think it's so important that he's going to learn, he or she, others, they're going to learn most from each other, right? We learn from,
that's true.
Teachers learning from teachers is going to be really, really the most effective way, and so I think that's where that best practice sharing comes in. So.
Or students. They might learn from their students too.
Good question.
So I think we have a next question, please.
Great. My name is Mike Lee. I'm from UCLA Social Sciences Computing. But more importantly, I'm a dad to a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. So there's a lot of evidence that students are ready for computer science, and that certainly a lot of resources are available for teachers. But what about parents? Has there been outreach for parents to really... For example, my wife is a dentist, and then my mother-in-law is a dentist, but the only thing they do is Candy Crush for my kids. So if there was any resources for them, kind of like a cheat sheet, because they're smart, and then if they're exposed to computer science and outreach to them, and they could really encourage my kids to really get on the path to.
So one of the things that we did with Code.org and the sort of popular outreach that it enabled, because it kind of went viral, we piggybacked on that to sort of make sure that we were providing those kinds of resources on our website and making that direct link. We have a site, a Youth Spark Hub, which is where young people can learn about all the different tools and resources, et cetera. We have a special place for teachers and parents on the hub because the most important thing is that we get out directly to young people, but we know that especially for those 5 and 7-year-olds, you got to get to the parents, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the teachers, and so we've got a place there where we've put some early programming, games, and not games, but learning how to create games. So we've got Kodu, we've got Small Basic, we have a number of things that are for kids at different ages, and kind of instructions for the parents and the teachers for how to use that to kind of just sort of light the fire about the excitement there. So theyouthsparkhub.com.
Yeah, we use, every other Saturday I teach a class with African American boys from 3rd grade to high school. And we use the tools that Microsoft uses. And we also use, if you go to code.org and you click on I think it's resources area. There are a number of really cool programs that you can use with your kids and in your community that will kind of give them some engagement around how to code and looking at different ways to get involved with computer science.
Any other thoughts here? Yeah, so we have another gentleman here who's got a question.
Hello, my name is Manuel Urrutia, and I'm a researcher emeritus here at UCLA, and I've spent my life doing physics. So I've been around computers for quite a while, and so I'm not a Luddite, unfortunately. But I wanted to point out a few things. UC defines the A through G curriculum. They are the gatekeepers. They're the ones who will say whether or not computer science is equivalent to taking a physics or a geology or whatever else class. So if you really want to talk about that, you need to talk to UC. Yeah. And then you need to talk to the Office of the President. They're the ones who do that. Second, concurrent enrollment has been around for at least 15 years that I know of. My kids actually tried it, and they were successful the first two, but the last one couldn't. There are no seats at the community colleges anymore. Right. So to do that, it's not up to the LAUSD. It's up to the state government to give enough money to the community colleges to fund those seats that are necessary for all those who need to take those classes.
Yeah, that's AB 1540, and there's a trailer bill that's now coming up that you should look at that helps the community college deal with the notion of how they fund that student.
Yeah, what it all boils down to is if there's no money coming from the state, the resources are going to go to the most impacted, which are the ones trying to get through the college requirements to go on to the four-year college. It's a question of distribution of resources. And lastly,
it also becomes an issue of race and class to me as well, as you look at our city of Los Angeles. So I'm totally down with you on that. That's true.
It depends on how you distribute the seats and where you can go and so forth. But anyway, we can talk about that for hours. Anyhow, the last thing is that the access to bandwidth. You said, well, you know, we all need access to bandwidth. Well, right now in the U.S., it's controlled by the corporations who are controlling the ISPs. As it stands, you cannot upload at the same speed as you download. So right then and there, you got a problem if you really, really want to use the cloud. So forget about having all these things about exchanges and so forth, because if your upload speed is 1/4 of the download speed, forget it. You're just going to be sitting there wasting your time.
But there's also parts of the country that don't have access to what the minimum definition of broadband is.
Oh, yeah, that is
so
for sure.
there's a definite role to play for governments to step in through programs like E-rate and other parts of the Universal Service Fund and working in public-private partnership and companies like Google that are doing things like fiber. So I think that's a point, but I also think there's definite role for the government to play to even more kind of taking that back a notch and going down to the very basics of if you live in a rural part of California or where I'm from in Arkansas, you're still looking at maybe dial-up speeds. And so the idea of cloud computing or any of the exciting things that cloud computing enable are out of bounds.
Well, even
and then the issue you talk about is maybe a luxury problem at that point.
Maybe I can just add a little perspective. I'm also on the faculty in electrical engineering, and I do a lot of work with network stuff. And so the fact that download speeds are higher than upload speeds is really a reflection of demand, right? People tend to stream video, for example, to their devices much more often than they're uploading video from their devices.
But if you're trying to create a society of people that produce content instead of just consuming it, you're going to need the upload speed. And how are you going to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. But I still think even in that ideal society where everyone is as much of a producer, I think still most of us will tend to consume. You know, we watch. It's a lot easier to watch an hour of video than to produce an hour of video.
I'm aware of that.
So,
but still.
I think you've got a new panel topic.
Yeah, exactly. Come back next year for a discussion on download and uploads. Thank you very much for the question. I think we've probably got, how many more people do we have? So 2 more people, is that? 3. Okay, so maybe if we can keep the questions very quick, and we'll try to keep the answers quick, because I do want to get people honor our time commitments. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Francisco Contreras. I'm the Innovations Liaison for the City of West Hollywood. So I actually come more from the local government perspective. And I'm glad that people are bringing up the broadband discussion, because we're actually exploring right now, doing a broadband infrastructure in the city that's actually done by the local government, and hopefully we'll explore some partnerships. Yay, Google, if that can happen. But one of my questions, I think you have been alluding to it a little bit, I think, Sarah and Lori, like what are some of the best practices for local governments to take in order to really create a more digitally fluent workforce and just citizenship overall? What are some of the best practices that you've seen, maybe some partnerships that I can look into as I try and move this effort forward at the City of West Hollywood?
Yeah, just a couple. I mean, we're fortunate. We've had, like in the Seattle area, we've been part of working together with local community and local government on the Washington STEM Center. So it's this idea of, together investing in STEM education earlier on and best practices, et cetera. Another is our IT academies, which address what Todd brought up earlier. It's the types of IT training for those right out of high school, maybe not going to college, not going to 4-year, but how can we help develop more job opportunities in the IT skills management and IT management role. The IT academies tend to be something that we provide affordable and access for local governments to then create the opportunity for courses to be accessed by their youth or their young adults. So I think the best practices around really practical applications of what's going to make a difference in a young person's life, that not just the training, not just the access, but then connected to the opportunity of whether it's the job or the startup, and having the local government provide that incentive that helps, augment that opportunity. So,
Or even the data. Great title, by the way. It's one of the best titles I think I've heard somebody having. I think it's also opening up the data that you have. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's an exciting way that you can engage students in a hands-on way. But mayors have been doing some interesting stuff around data innovation, and it can help you, analyze what you're doing is working and maybe ways to improve what you're working, right? And better target the limited resources that all cities have to confront. So I would agree that it's practical things, but I think you've got maybe more resources than you think you do. So looking at that and how to engage the young people in your community and supporting organizations. We have a lot of partner organizations you can find on our website on google.com/education or google.com/safety center. And then other ones like, that are featured on that, but like code.org and all these exciting organizations that are in this space, there might be some partnerships to pursue there.
Great. Okay, so we can move. We have a couple. Keep the question brief, and we'll keep the answer brief because I want to get everyone before we.
I just want to apologize. I skipped it, but I have to go. My name is Michelle Garakian. I work with Mayor Eric Garcetti. Hi, Jane. So I'm really happy that you guys are hosting this today because this is something that is foremost on his agenda. The issue of digital divide, and not just bridging the divide between the unserved and minority communities, but also between women and the aged. So right now we're in the process of kind of putting together an internal exploratory committee to discuss what policies we can create at a municipal level to help bridge these divides. So I just wanted to say hi and introduce myself. I gave my cards to Colleen, to Sarah and Lori. At some point we can continue this conversation. I also wanted to kind of dispel some maybe misnomers about the relationship between LAUSD and the city, that the mayor actually doesn't have any jurisdiction over LAUSD. It's actually governed by a board that is elected. And to that end, right now the mayor is working on 2 different initiatives that actually focus on the Beyond the Bell, which is the after-school space. One is a summer of learning program where we're authorizing kind of a digital badge program, if you will. It's kind of like a online, like an online Girl Scout or Boy Scout kind of program where kids in the summer, they're able to go and they learn a skill like coding, and we're going to be engaging with Heidi Partovi at code.org. And they're able to get a badge for it. And this just goes beyond this as like resume building, and it engages kids from 14 up to 20, I believe. And so there's some other programs that we're working on. I just wanted to introduce myself and also tell you that we have another person that's part of the mayor's tech team. It's whopping 2 people in the city, but it's more than it was before, which was 0.
Well, yeah, we're really appreciative that the mayor's office sent people to this.
Right. It's Peter Marks, who's our new Chief Innovation Technology Officer, which I'm sure some of you guys actually know or have worked with in some capacity or will get to know. But he is focused on internal policy and how to use technology to make government more efficient and effective. So our challenge is, as a city, it's kind of like a total firewall as it relates to constituents. So what we want to do is improve the interface with our customers, which are our constituents, you. So ultimately, when you're visiting our website and trying to access services, it's not a horrible, awful, horrific experience. So anyway, I just want to let everybody know that we're working on these things. If you have any questions, I'll leave some of my cards with Colleen. And it's been great to meet you, and thank you very much for addressing these issues. They're so important. So.
Okay, so just 2 more very quick questions if we can.
Hi, my name's Rian, and Ms. Harnick touched on this a little bit, but I had a question about how America is doing in terms of educating its workforce in terms of a digital fluency as compared to some of the other countries, and if they're doing something better, what is something we can adopt to get on that level?
I don't particularly have any stats on this, but I would say that there are definitely other countries which are placing more emphasis on paid internships and apprenticeships in a variety of careers, not just technology. I think that's a really interesting best practice for other countries to look at, so because it addresses what I mentioned earlier about, okay, it's not just the training and the access and the education, but then there's the job, and how do we make that, what's the bridge? And the internship or apprenticeship is a critical bridge. Yes, it's okay maybe sometimes if they're non-paid, but the paid ones are really important. And so investing in that, I think, is something that I see a lot of other countries doing and to really good effect.
Thank you very much. And then very quick last question.
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here. This is so awesome and so exciting. I'm Evan McMullen, and I work at Wondrous, which is a creative storytelling agency in West Hollywood. And we tell sort of the stories of the most innovative people, movements, and organizations. And I'm a lifelong computer nerd. I should have been a computer science major, but I studied the anthropology of video games, so like it's close enough. So I love to code, and I feel like a large component of my passion for coding and my friends' passions, for coding growing up. I'm from Ohio, but a lot of my friends grew up and live in the Bay Area, where I was last weekend. I feel like there's a big connect between enthusiasm and access to tech education and local entrepreneurial spirit in that field. Mm-hmm. And I know that we talk a lot about Silicon Beach as this burgeoning local community, but really, is it that big all beyond Snapchat compared to Northern California? And so my question is, what is the role of sort of a local culture of entrepreneurship in encouraging young students to pursue technical fields, and how can we improve that culture here in Los Angeles? Thanks.
I think it's one thing that they can do is give examples. You hear a lot about, you've heard us talk about underrepresented communities in the CS and STEM field. And I think one thing that a local community can do is come together to show people the exciting things that you can do with that kind of education. So bringing in people that represent all these different kinds of communities and all these different kind of career paths, and really giving, I think, the ability for hope and aspiration and inspiration for doing something else. So maybe it's like taking a rock star and showing how they use coding in their career. So I think there's something exciting that can happen there, and that should be hopefully pretty easy to achieve.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So I'd like to just briefly close it by, first and foremost, thanking our panelists. I'd also like to thank Susan Woodward, who organized all of this, and I'm not sure if she's in the room here, and Colleen Callahan and the other folks from the Luskin Center. And then finally, I'll mention that our next and last panel of this series is May 6th, another Tuesday, on preventing technology-facilitated exploitation. It's obviously another incredibly important topic, and so we would certainly welcome having any of you come back for that. And thank you very much.